Hello, welcome to the Brain Scrub, a somewhat improvised approach to mental health. My name's Glenn Zollers. Thank you for tuning into today's episode, which is about helicopter parenting and some other topics. But before I get going, I just want to say I have been kind of off the Brain Scrub for a bit, being busy in my life. Lots is going on, and I can't possibly compete against the social media magnet in the United States called Donald Trump, who is glued to social media, and consequently, so am I at times. But I'm just blown away by everything that's going on, and I don't understand it. It's amazing how one person can impact an entire planet, one person, and nobody's holding him accountable for his actions. I'm just amazed that we live in such a world that this can actually happen. And we've seen things like this happen in the past, and they were gotten control of. And I think it's going to slowly happen that we are going to regain control of what one person has taken control of in order to stop it all. Very, very upsetting. And it reminds me of parental alienation, how one person can change a child's life and the entire experience that child will have and the experience that the family that's targeted will have. Now, I've made a substantial effort in not going to my son's YouTube account, not going to his podcast, because I found the things that he was saying were very Trump-like at times. His truth, not the truth. Stories that he was sharing, insults of individuals in his life, and it was very upsetting to listen to. I also commend him for some of the great things that he's doing on his podcast and helping others his age get through life. But recently I saw one of them, and I kind of like twisted my arm. Eventually I'll just take a look at this, and it was nothing about me. It was just something that he was doing on the podcast, and it just made me sad and angry about some of the things that he was talking about, and that he is the byproduct of someone like Donald Trump in his life that got his control, that used different techniques to manipulate and coerce and other things to him. And that I'm speculating on this, but I've also seen it happen in action. And that led me to doing some more research on parents that are overprotective of their kid. Anxiety rates are going up across the world. And I'm reading a book that talks about how iPhones, smartphones are a huge contributor to this. But it also gets into other things such as parents that have become very protective due to fear that something's going to happen to their child, that they're going to be kidnapped, murdered, or whatever. So kids are now staying more indoors. They're anxious about going outside because they've learned that when you're out there, something bad can happen. And I experienced that with my son. Never forget, we're in Prague, Czechoslovakia with him, and this was with my wife, and we're on a subway there, and he was very scared, holding on to my hand, thinking, you know what, I'm in a strange place, somebody could get me. And I said, don't worry, nobody's going to get you. It's going to be fine. But these fears that can impact a child, and especially if your alienating parent might have some sort of personality disorder. Maybe they're a sociopath, or they have some other type of mental health issue. My fear is, will the child take that on? Because I've seen evidence of my child, when I did know him, and even the things that he says now, are the same things that his mother did at times. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm just saying that I see these things. And ever since he was a kid, he was being protected. And I've talked about this in other episodes around her history, how she didn't have a father in her life. The father left, how she just had her mother in her life, that she was blamed for certain things. So I get why she's being protective. But also be mindful that when people go through that kind of thing, when they're younger, it creates trauma, huge trauma. And many of us don't know what we're doing because we're very unconscious to our behaviors and our actions and how it impacts others. So I get why she's protective, but it's important to also look at what are the possible psychological effects on a child as they grow up. And it's no wonder he's not in touch with me. No wonder he's not in touch with me based on all these different things that can happen. And just to remind my listeners of some of the things that I witnessed was whenever my son was ill, his mother would take care of him. That if he didn't feel like doing something with his anxiety, for example, like going to a hockey game in the morning and he was a goalie and he had to play hockey, that she would give in when he said, "Oh, I don't want to go, my stomach hurts." And I knew it was just anxiety, but she would give in. She had a lot of dependency on him around sometimes him having to sleep with her out of fear from her for whatever reason, going to the bathroom together at ages in like early teens because something might happen to him. There were times where she would have a blow up with him and then come over to my place to apologize for what she did. There were so many different things that happened that show that she deeply cares about him, for sure, but to a point that it erased me from that relationship because she was the caregiver. She took care of everything he needed, gave into everything he wanted. And I know she had some boundaries as well, but there was also a lot of fear in the home because she would get angry a lot. And I experienced that anger when I was with her in my relationship. And I had a lot of fear. And I'm just going to go through a list here that I got off ChatGPT. I might as well leverage the tool around what can happen to a child that has excessive protection from one or both parents. In this case, it was protection from one parent. And whenever I tried to empower him to do certain things, I got a lot of pushback. And there was times where he would call his mom to save him from things like, "I'd like you to take a bus when you're 13 to school," or "I'd like you to walk to school." There was a time he went on a date. It was such an amazing time where he was venturing out on his own on his first little date, but he didn't want his mom to know because she would never let him do it. And we kept an eye on him, not when he was on his date, but we said, "Okay, we're going to drop you off here and then come and meet us here. We'll be there," because it was only like a 2-hour long thing or whatever. But it was empowering him. However, she had every other control on him that you need to do this, you need to do that. And any initiative I had around self-empowerment for my son was quickly declined because somebody who is alienating a child wants all the power, and you don't want to empower that child to have their own point of view. And if you do have your own point of view, there might be hell to pay as a result. So I'm also not trying to play victim here. I want to make that clear. I've learned a lot about this, but by learning this kind of stuff, I can now appreciate what happened, what's going on, which puts me in a greater place of peace. And I also get that I may never see him again based on all this stuff that's going on. So to come to the acceptance that I helped create a child, I was there for the amazing years with him. And there was times we had our struggles. But for the first 13 years, I was part of his life, which are the most informative years. And I see how he has turned into a little Glenn in how he does things now in some respects. So to let go of that and then to now focus on my life, which I, again, have ups and downs, and mainly ups now, but also still learning about different things. So for anybody who has been alienated, this might be a great podcast. If you're a parent and you are protecting your kids, I would suggest that you maybe don't and let them do things that might have a tiny bit of risk out there so they can see the consequence of their actions, that they can learn, that they can develop, that they can grow. Because if you're doing all the work and protecting them, they may not have as much resilience, and they likely will have more anxiety as they get older. And there's things that people do that are unhealthy at times. We might think they're healthy to overcome our insecurities and our anxieties, such as becoming a YouTube sensation, or what I'm doing today, recording a podcast, that I get gratification from pleasing other people at the expense of my own self-gratification and self-belief in myself. And that is damaging over the long run. Now, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I would advocate that everybody goes through some sort of self-awareness training to see who you are in life, why you are who you are, so you have more agency over how you choose to live your life. Now, I completely digress from the original topic here, so I'm going to just jump right into it and get into the impacts of excessive protection and the developmental challenges that may happen. And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but these may happen. And if you have a child that has anxiety now, and they might be a bit older, you might start to connect the dots in terms of what maybe you contributed to, and be willing to forgive yourself. You did the best you could, but what that could have led to now in your child. So number one is emotional and physiological effects. And this is anxiety, a lot of worrying, fear of things, because you were always shielded from it. And I am going to share my own personal story with the use of my son in this case, because he had a lot of worries about everything. He had worries about death. He had worries about being on transit. I had excessive worries about health concerns when I was a kid, because I grew up in a very dysfunctional home at times. I was never shielded from challenges. My son, on the other hand, was shielded from challenges, so he didn't know how to solve problems. He would react very quickly to certain things because he wasn't taught the skills on how to evaluate, process information so that you can be a critical thinker and trying to figure out what's going on versus pushing the problem away, which his mom does, pushes the problem away. I was the problem. I'm going to push you away. Done. So this can lead to low self-esteem where they feel very incapable of handling things on their own. For me, I actually became quite opposite. I handled my life on my own. I did everything on my own because I couldn't trust my parents for being there for me or supporting me. So what I did, I just paid for everything. I did everything on my own. I made all the decisions on my own. And that had its consequences because now I struggle asking for help and asking for support. But children that are protected may be challenged with that kind of stuff. They may still live with a parent because they don't know how to do it, and the parent's also protecting them. So they become dependent on the parent, and in some cases, the parent becomes dependent on the child. It's almost like being in wedlock, where you're not married, of course. You're not, hopefully you're not having sexual intercourse, and if you are, whoa, that's a whole different problem. Leads to perfectionism and fear of failure. Now that has impacted me for sure. I am perfectionist because I learned that in order for me to be valued, I better be perfect. But this can have challenges in dealing with different situations and setbacks in one's life. So that's number one. There's some sort of emotional and psychological effects of protection. Next one is social development. And one of these is poor social skills. If you are with your parents all the time and you're not out there with other kids, for whatever reason, you're not learning from peers what to do when you're with peers. So if you're not around peers and then you are all of a sudden with them, you may not know how to behave because you haven't learned how to do that. My son was decent at creating friends, and it took some time for him to do it. He was very shy. He was very concerned about going into social settings, but that improved very quickly. And now it seems like he's very socially assertive and is able to build friends, which is great. And it seems like he has a great friend network as well. But a lot of times, people who are protected will have difficulty finding friends, dealing with conflict, letting people know what they want because they become very dependent on their other parent or their parent protecting them and being there for them to vet through those relationships, to speak up for them, because they're essentially taking the voice away and the problem skills away of that child by protecting them from possible consequences. They also may become dependent on authority figures to make decisions. They will need validation from others because this is how protective parents do things. They highly validate their child. You're the best. You're wonderful. I'm going to take care of you. I'm here for you. Then it's going to be challenging for them to make certain decisions in your life. And because you're always praised by your protective parent, you might look at ways of validating who you are. This is something I do in my life. I look for validation through the training that I do. And that's not why I got into it, but now I get that that's one of the reasons that I do it, because I feel important. My son has a podcast. He's getting validation from his audience members. And that's kind of what happens. So there's pros and cons to all of this. So I'm not looking at everything here as a negative, but it can become a negative if you don't realize it and then manage yourself differently, because all these things lead to who you are as an individual. And sometimes we may do something that we don't know we're doing, but once we become aware of that, then we can start investigating, well, why do I do that? And then I can change things. Next one is obvious, and that is cognitive and problem-solving skills. There is a lack of resilience and a limited critical thinking skills because they were never taught how to do that. Somebody did that for them, so they can't necessarily make decisions in the moment or resolve these problems, or they will become fearful of problem-solving because it's something that's very foreign to them. They never had to do it. They always got their way or their protective parents' way, which, of course, leads into the next one, and not being an independent thinker or lacking independence, difficulty handling responsibilities, like basic life things such as cooking, conflicts, things like that. Protective parents will do a lot for their kids. I'll drive you here. I'll take you here. I'll cook for you. I'll do this for you. I'll do this for you. They end up doing a lot for their children, and their children have no understanding on how to do that. And especially at younger years, like up until the age of 13, 14, you're pretty much fully baked. And if you always had a parent that was in there doing everything for you, you may have some difficulty having responsibility or taking responsibility and holding yourself accountable to doing what you need to do to survive in this life, which then creates more interdependence on others. And interdependence is a good thing. And it can also be a bad thing because then you become reliant on others for your own success. Can also, because of this impact of independence and on independence, that you may have a lot of fear of doing new things, or you may avoid new experiences because you don't want to disappoint yourself. You don't want to disappoint others. My son struggled so much with this. There were certain things that didn't go right. Like he was hiking and he would fall. All of a sudden he hated hiking. Biking, he would fall, hated biking. Skiing, he struggled, hated skiing. He became more of a homebody, watching movies, television programs, video games, because that's a safe place to be in staying in your home. But there's consequences of that. Of course, you begin to avoid situations. You lack social skills. You lack that sense of adventure. One becomes reliant on a computer screen or their phone, social media, whatever it might be, versus real life situations. Now, when I was with my son, I definitely advocated for trying many different things. And the nice thing was he was great at everything he did. He was so fantastic. He was great at hockey. He was great at building teams and motivating kids and all these things. But protective parents can take that away for their own needs of control and protectionism. Because by doing that, you're creating a child who's more independent. And for a protective parent, their greatest fear is likely to not have that child in their life. And they will do everything to make sure that that doesn't happen because they are dependent on you as well. So while the protective parent is protecting the child is also protecting the parent from their own issues that they have. And yes, I've seen this. A lack of friends, firing friends, loneliness, different things. And so it becomes this feeding off each other and protecting each other, which creates that very dependent relationship, which of course will lead to the next point here, relationship challenges. How can one be related to other people if you are only related to one person? So there can be difficulties setting boundaries. One thing I did listen to on his podcast way back when was he is struggling with his relationship with his mother because he has to kind of hide things from her and not be open and honest because she'll get upset about things. So he may struggle when he's older, when he meets somebody else and he wants to be with them, and then he might want to leave the home. There may be some struggles there. And then building those boundaries with that protective parent that, you know what? No, now I'm living my life on my own. And my door is always open for him in terms of talking to him about this stuff because I felt that I always had to protect my mom through what she was going through. So the next one is very obvious as well, and that's an over-reliance on your parents for getting things done. Now, the next one here is interesting. It's possible long-term effects around things like delayed maturity. I'm seeing that when I watch his videos. There is definitely things that I'm seeing around maturity. Like he's very mature in some ways and very immature in other ways at his age. Doesn't fit into the social norms of things. His tagline is really no dads, no schools, no education, just comedy for living his life. And it's quite evident that he's like that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. He's living his best life from what I can see. And I can see that his advancement as an adult may be not as robust as what the norm is out there. And he'll grow up. He'll get there. But I'm definitely seeing this. Thankfully, there is no self-harm that seems to be evident, which is another consequence of overprotective parents. Now, of course, the next point is one that is definitely happening, and that is strained family relationships. That because the protective parent is all good and everybody else is all bad, that there's an emotional distance and resentment about others that are involved in the child's life, and eventually those people are gone from that child's life, which is what I'm in right now. That they may feel unloved, unwanted. Remember, they have lost their family. Most of us grow up being loved by a group of individuals that we call our family and our friends. People who are in this situation that are overprotective have one core caregiver that loves them, where others have many caregivers that love them. So those people generally will likely feel more accepted by others because they are used to being accepted by others, and they'll feel wanted. And the challenge here is that these children are at risk of withdrawing from family interactions altogether because of the protective parent. Next, difficulties in school and social settings. Don't know too much about this because I was only involved in his life up until the age of 13, but he was involved in, I believe, a couple of post-secondary institutions, and that never materialized. Obviously, another problem in social life is struggle of trusting other people because they've learned not to trust their other half of who they are, the alienated parent. So to then be able to trust other people will be difficult, especially when you instill all your trust in the decisions that your protective parent is making, and you trust their stories, you trust their beliefs, you trust what they say. That has a tremendous impact on one's biases, one's self-beliefs, one's belief about other people. Different things like that can happen in terms of their social life. So all in all, there are many, many challenges around protective parents. And to sum things up here, anxiety, depression, low self-confidence are very common in overprotective children. Struggles in their workplace, struggles making decisions, struggles about where do I go in my career. There's also struggles around self-blame on things when they get older, depression eventually that they don't have all their family members in their life, guilt, grief. This is traumatic for a child to lose a family and a parent. That's trauma. And that will come up likely in their future where they don't feel as worthy. What happens if that protective parent dies? What is going to go on with the child then, where they now have no other family members there for them? Many of these children do reconnect with their alienated parent, and many do not. My hope for all of you, if you are alienated, or if you have a parent that's being overprotected, or if you're a child that's being overprotected, to understand that it might feel good right now, or it might be okay right now if you're the child, or you feel you're doing the right thing as a parent, but consider the long-term consequence. My behavior is this with my child. If they learn this behavior and eventually we become our parents, how will that translate into their life? What will be the pros? What are the cons of these ways of being with children? There is support out there to deal with this. There are things that I've done, such as the Mankind Project, New Warrior Training Adventure for men. There's Landmark Worldwide. There's Inner Predator for women. There's so many different self-help and self-actualizations and self-awareness programs out there that one can be part of to get through this stuff, because it's deep, deep work. So my message to you is, if you notice that you're struggling in some area of life and you might have had an overprotective parent, or you might be an overprotective parent, do something about it before it's too late. Thanks for listening.